On top, we have Canadian singer Sarah McLachlan. On the bottom, we have James Gandolfini playing the role of Tony Soprano in the hit series Sopranos. So what do these two performers have in common? They're both drug dealers, but not in a Walter White, Jesse Pinkman kind of way. They push the naturally occurring hormone in our brains called oxytocin, the love drug. Hi, this is Jeff Goldfinger. Welcome to the 18th episode of the STEM Signal, where we help the STEM educated increase their career signal among the workplace noise. This is part 4 of my series on trust in the workplace, how to produce it with your colleagues, how to recognize when one of your colleagues is trustworthy or not. Today's episode is going to be on the biological basis of a particular hormone. Now, let's get down to business. Okay, links to the first 3 episodes are in the description below. The first 2 episodes had to do with linguistic distinctions, how we use language to develop trusted relationships. Part 3 and this part 4 is all about the biological and evolutionary nature of trust building. Let's turn to the Sopranos and see how they build trust among each other.
He's a good man, say it.
Congratulations.
Come in.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You're looking good.
This means a lot to me, T.
That sure is a lot of hugging. But the truth is, that's what builds this oxytocin trusted relationship. The physical touch causes an effect of increased oxytocin. That's why it's called the love drug. We get huge doses of it when we have intimate relationships with our partner or when a baby is breastfeeding from its mother. Both the baby and the mother receive huge doses of oxytocin to help increase the pair bonding. All right, so you might ask yourself, if this is occurring in babies and mothers, what about others beyond the human species or even beyond primates? Well, it turns out that oxytocin is evolutionarily ancient. It's even found in non-mammal species such as birds. It goes by the name mesotocin, but it's essentially the same effect. But if you look around the animal kingdom, lions, tigers, bears, dogs, cats, elephants, or even between mammal species. So whenever we're petting our dog, or in this case, hugging our lion, we each get a dose of oxytocin. It's part of the trust building between mammals. All right, so I'm not asking you to go around and hug your colleagues. You know, if you work in a workplace where you have huggers around. But the truth is, you don't even need physical contact to produce that oxytocin effect. So meet Dr. Love. This is Dr. Paul Zak. He's the director of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies at the Claremont Graduate University in Southern California. And he talked about the role of oxytocin as the trust molecule and how we humans learn to trust one another precisely because of this oxytocin hormone. In order to do the research that he did, he actually would dose people with using a nasal spray of oxytocin, and he would then also collect people's blood to determine the levels of oxytocin in their system. So by his words, not mine, he likes to call himself both a drug dealer and a vampire. But his work led to, a few years later, the notion that trust building is also vitally important in the workplace if you're going to build a high-performance organization. So this notion of just thinking about whether somebody else is trustworthy or thinking about a situation that produces this trusting effect can actually make you more high-performing in the workplace. One of the things that he showed is this notion of generosity. So when we trust somebody, we tend to be more generous. In fact, 80% more generous when we've been doped with oxytocin. So what's one of the manipulative techniques that industry used? Well, that ties us back to Sarah McLachlan from the beginning. Some of you are probably familiar with her very famous ad campaign with the American Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Animals, the ASPCA. her very oxytocin-driven commercials led to a $30 million increase in donations to the society. So very effective, right? So just thinking about something that produces the oxytocin effect can make you more generous with others, including complete strangers, okay? So assuming you love your spouse, assuming you love your kids, just thinking about them will actually produce the same oxytocin effect as actually hugging them. Now, this notion of thinking about others in situations, it has to do with being in what's called the in-group. This is what psychologists and neuroscientists that study this behavior, they talk about the in-group and the out-group. The more you can be part of the in-group, all else being equal, performance aside, you will be considered more trustworthy. So, for example, I grew up in New Jersey. All else being equal, if I'm working with a colleague who's also from New Jersey, I will trust them more than somebody who grew up in Wyoming, as an example. I know that sounds weird and we shouldn't be like that, but again, from an evolutionary biological perspective, this is what our brains do. So whether it's the state that we grew up in, the alma mater we went to, Northwestern University, the football club, in this case Real Madrid, that we both might follow, being in the in-group produces this trusting effect. So let's turn to Dobie Gray to summarize this notion of the in-group.
I'm in with the in crowd. I go where the in crowd goes. I'm in with the in crowd. And I know what the in crowd knows.
All right, so in crowd, in group, right? I wanted to find something that was useful for that. So again, all else being equal, our in-group members are more trusted. Engineers trust other engineers, physicists trust other physicists, academic researchers trust other academic researchers. Nobody trusts psychologists because they're worried about how they're evaluating us. Okay, that's just a joke. But the point is that especially in the STEM world, we tend to trust others that are just like us. I mentioned that I spent 20 years in the Navy, flew airplanes in the Navy. So every year, it's the in-group is the Navy, my fellow naval officers and sailors, and the out-group is the Army. So here's an example of your tax dollars hard at work producing this in-group, out-group effect. So what are the key takeaways for today? We are social animals that are driven to bond, to pair bonding by oxytocin, an evolutionarily ancient hormone. Oxytocin is addictive. It's stimulated both physically or emotionally with a positive feedback mechanism. In other words, a little hug with our partner, we want more, right? A little bit of oxytocin leads to more. We become addicted to it. That's why we stay together most of the time in these pair bonds as mammals. So to increase your trustworthiness, you want to increase your in-group associations. Remember, just thinking about somebody who's in your in-group can produce that same trustworthiness, oxytocin effect. Now, I'm not asking you to do this disingenuously, but this is one of the things that's really hard for the STEM educated. We're not normally taught in our engineering or hard science classes about the role of socialization, and we tend not to be very social, right? So what I'm suggesting to you is this is a way to enhance your trustworthiness in the workplace is by being more social, finding those in-group connections. All right, so when I started my first episode on trust, I knew it was a complicated topic. I didn't think it was going to take 4 full episodes to cover the whole thing. So thank you all for hanging in there with me. So the question then becomes,
What do we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
shout out to Burn After Reading. So what did we learn? Well, trustworthiness is not and is certain things. So it is not an assertion of fact. It is an assessment. So in a much earlier episode, a link to that is also in the description, I talk about the difference between assertions and assessments. Assertions are things that can be independently verified as factual and true, whereas assessments are really just your opinion could be grounded or ungrounded. So trust is an assessment of somebody's, could be grounded or ungrounded. I've given you in these 4 episodes how to ground the notion of somebody being trustworthy using both linguistic and biological means. Okay, so trustworthiness is not then a moral judgment or a permanent label. If you break trust, it is in fact repairable. And I talk about that going back, way back in part 1 of this. So that closes the book on trust. So if you found this content valuable, as always, please like and subscribe and ring the bell. But to truly increase your STEM signal, I would encourage you to share this with others that you care about. Send them the link. Talk to them about what you learned out of this. Make this a little discussion item around the water cooler or the lunchroom. When you talk about this with other people you care about and they find it valuable, that's what increases your STEM signal at work. All right, again, this is Jeff Goldfinger. Thank you very much for listening to this lesson. And until next time, keep your STEM signal above the noise.